the 70 that came over to Egypt that were given favor because Joseph was the second in command. They multiplied into a great nation that was to be the light of the world.
Right.
Is that the big plan?
I mean, taking it from the small scale of one person to a nation is wonderful. I think that is. This Joseph was here for a specific thing that God was having him do. When he got to next week and the family came down, that was a different part of the plan. Joseph was involved, but now the whole family's involved. It's gone up to 70.
Okay. They're protected in the land of Goshen.
Yes.
Whereas if they had multiplied in the land of Canaan, there would have been the pollution. Even though it later came, but
Right.
because they took up with
They
the
went
Egyptian gods.
here instead of there.
And don't the 12 apostles go to 70 also?
Yes.
There's
Yeah.
70 disciples.
70
Yeah.
disciples.
Disciples,
Yeah.
yeah.
So it starts 1, 12, 70,
Right.
nation. And remember, the purpose of the Israelites was to go into the promised land and be a light to the nations. Well, it started with one little light here, and then expanded and expanded. So I think it's very, very
Mhm.
accurate, Eddie. I really think that's why are there so few
Well,
in
and
this
it's all-
movement, and it's one at a time.
It's all about
brilliant.
discipleship,
It's all about discipleship.
like Art talked
Go
about.
thee into the world and make disciples.
Make disciples, don't go into all the world and make altar calls. Although that's a step, and it's not one that we can throw out. There has to be a first step. But then we keep going. It's the getting in the race. The beginning of the race is not the race. Terry.
I think this is also a journey
Absolutely.
that we are in. Personally, we're in a journey.
Yeah. Think about something that, as we were reading, let me find the verse I'm looking for. I think it's in 41. Yeah, in Genesis 41:41. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Pharaoh took his signet ring from his finger, put it on Joseph's finger, etc., etc. Made him second in command. This isn't the first time this has happened. Joseph was in charge of everything except Potiphar's wife. He was second in command. He lost all of it. And now it's been restored again.
Well, and he was kind of second in command in jail too. He was left-
Jacob became in charge
He was,
of,
he had fiber trap out.
think about this,
At home, he was second, only his father was higher.
yeah, at home he was second in command, only his father was higher than him at home. But
He
yet,
is
every
most
single
loved.
time, he's not striving to get promoted or undermine the authority that's above him. He understands his position, where he is. How many times do we try and
Get
make
ahead.
things better for ourselves, get ahead, and not accept, be content, as this text message said, be content with where we are, and realize God is shaping us, not into who we are today, but who he wants us to become. It's a journey. It's absolutely a journey. I mean, look at Joseph's journey. I mean, he's excited, this young kid, full of fire and energy, has these dreams, boom, he's thrown in a pit and sold to Egypt. Whoa. Then he's raised up. Then he's thrown in the dungeon. He's given power. Then he's brought back. Then he's raised up. And the whole time, if you look at his journey,
You
he
think
kept the authority in the right place.
you think how we talked about how he told his brothers, okay, listen, and even obviously next week when he sends his brothers back to go get his father, and the last thing he says to him, he says, and don't argue, don't fight, because I know you guys are riddled with guilt and whatever, and you're going to blame me, and I know you well enough to know, so don't fight. But so this element of forgiveness and recognition that this is God's plan, and yet it's so beautiful because, and so what does he do? What is the rest of God's plan? Joseph is about to sell everybody down the river into captivity. He's about to make slaves of everybody, which is God's plan.
Exactly.
Exactly. I mean, so it's almost like he's setting the tone for like, and don't forget to have forgiveness for me when I sell you guys into captivity, because remember, it's God's plan.
That's right. You put me in this disposition.
Yep,
You know, and we're supposed to be slaves too.
Christ, to the, yeah, to the kingdom.
Okay,
Yeah, just kind of going along with what you're saying, and just some things that have been cooking in me over the past couple of months, trying to understand, you know, spiritual warfare, free will, God's sovereignty, all those really difficult things to understand. And so we look at this picture where all the suffering that Joseph went through was appointed by God. Now, there were terrible things where the enemy was working this whole time, but the enemy didn't sell him into slavery, and the enemy didn't send him to prison. But the way that I'm trying to understand things, rather than looking at the enemy controlling circumstances that I'm in, that it's a war that's in the spirit. But the enemy, I guarantee you, stood next to Joseph every time and said, oh, it'd be okay if you just buckled under pressure. Oh, it'd be okay if you just didn't trust God. Oh, it'd be okay if you took the situation that God's put you in, which might be a trial, and you stepped out from under the pressure. And so that's kind of the way that I'm understanding the enemy now. You know, rather than, you know, we talk about, you know, my car breaks down, and then, oh, the enemy's, you know, in my engine or something like that. You know. The enemy's caused this to befall me, and that might not necessarily be the case. My car might have broke down, and, you know, I don't get into a wreck 3 miles down the road. Where the enemy is going to be is when my car breaks down, is they're going to be like, oh, great. Wouldn't it have been better if I died in Egypt, right? The enemy's going to try to get me to say things like that. So rather than acting in faith, acting in the flesh. And so that's the thing that you have to see all through the wilderness, same thing. They were hungry for 3 days because it was God's plan, right? He understands that people crave things. They gave into intense craving because the enemy tempted them to do that. But the situation that they were in was something that God had ordained. So it wasn't the enemy that didn't allow them to have food. It wasn't the enemy that made them thirsty. But it was the enemy that tempted them in their spirit
play
to turn against God.
Turn against God, yeah.
Right.
You think about Yeshua being tempted in the wilderness. Who led him out to be tempted?
Father.
The Spirit. The Spirit led him into the wilderness to be tempted.
And that's where we have to differ from a lot of religions that say there's, you know, God is good and Satan is terrible. They act like Satan is almost on the same level, where
Right.
God is God. There's no one
Exactly.
close to him. He takes Satan and uses him. There's a Hebrew, do you know how to write Tov?
Tov.
Tov, can you write Tov in Hebrew? I mean, not T-O-V, but the real.
Well, I can write that.
Okay, a tet, a vav.
That's the
tet.
up backwards G almost?
Tet, backwards G.
No,
that's-
upside down though.
Hold on, one moment.
It's
got the
just
cheat
like
sheet.
almost like a G without
All right.
the.
Need a cheat sheet out.
Tet is number 9.
Ah,
Nine
yeah.
letter, tet.
Let's see. Something like that.
Okay, but it doesn't come together.
It's not together.
No.
Yeah, there's a gap.
There's a gap right there.
There's a gap, okay.
It's probably just the angle you're sitting at. Is there a gap here?
I see.
Then a box, and then a bet. What you got? Like the bet. Okay. Toe. Okay,
Toe.
so see, you know, usually you can see that the tet is
That's
the tet
both.
is kind of a serpent that's winding around, and it usually doesn't come together quite like that. And so the serpent is always out to get us. But you have this word, tov. And what does that word tov mean?
Good.
Write it so they can understand that tov. T-O-V.
Yes.
You're not back.
Just playing.
Tov. Okay, so that is the word for good. So he takes the serpent, which is the 9th letter. That first letter up there on the right is the tet, and that stands for the serpent, Satan, the bad guy. Okay, and then you have the vet, the house. Okay, and then you have connecting. Okay, so the serpent is coming into the house. He is allowing the serpent to come into your house.
And that's good, right? That's a hard one to get,
But it's for your good.
right?
Okay? Because what are you going to do with the serpent, it all depends on you. Okay, he takes the serpent and uses him to test us to show what's in our heart, to show the good that's in our heart. Because anybody can praise him when things are going well. But when you keep coming and keep staying when things are really bad and you just want to run away, then that is his glory. That's giving him glory.
Amen.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah, and as we
Job,
start,
I don't know.
oh, sorry,
Like
go
Job,
ahead.
yeah, like Job. Yeah.
So as we start thinking about these things, there's so much, we're just little people on this tiny little planet, but God has called us to understand these incredibly deep things and called us to look into these things. And so as I keep looking at them, I just try to move cautiously, because on that note, what you're saying is absolutely true. There's a kind of when you take that idea and follow it out too far, that Satan isn't really some kind of real enemy, but really he's just like a puppet that God uses.
That's exactly it.
Right, and so I wouldn't go so far
But
as to
we
say.
can't say he's a puppet because he's a lot more powerful than us.
Right.
We just have to make sure that we don't equate him to God. Because that's the thing, these things come into our lives and Satan makes everything white look black and black look white, and Satan likes to confuse everything. And I heard this week one of the definition for truth in the 1828 Webster's Dictionary is reality. Truth is what is real. And what does Satan take? He takes things and pops stuff up in our mind, things that are not real. Things that are not real.
Illusions.
False
Illusions.
evidence appearing real.
He makes, fear, things appearing.
Yeah, I guess what I was trying to get at, while you're highlighting how God can take what Satan does, because God's sovereign, he won't be thwarted.
Exactly.
The only thing I just want to be cautious of is this other kind of idea that somehow God and Satan are like two sides of the same coin.
No.
And I think that gets kind of either thrown around implicitly or explicitly, that the enemy is not some kind of real enemy, and I think that's false. He is absolutely a completely real, completely
But
actual
you
thing.
think about what the New Testament says about our enemy. He is like a roaring lion. Yeshua is the roaring lion.
Amen.
Yeshua is the one with the teeth in Pilgrim's Progress, when they really got up, they had this lion that was just roaring and horrible, but when they got up to it, it didn't have any teeth. He's toothless unless we give him
That authority.
the authority. Is just from the time of Adam. We have the choice. We can have God as our authority, or we can abdicate to death. It's the enemies.
We have a choice.
We have a choice.
Yes, we
That's
do.
so true, every
Just-
single minute of every day.
Yeah, just like when, we don't know what Pharaoh's wife looked like. She probably was young and beautiful, lots of makeup, and, we don't know what and she just kept on and on and on at him. How easy it would have been for him to give in to that, nobody would have known, but yet he had his integrity, and because of his integrity, how did he get rewarded? The dungeon. And that's gonna happen in our lives. It looks like, God, what are you doing here, You said I'd have an abundant life, where is it, and
We're looking for it here and now.
and yeah, it isn't right this moment, but he's going, just like that serpent's tail comes around. Everything in life comes around. And if you wait out the enemy, it'll come back around to good. And God works it out for good. Whatever it is. It may look, like you can't go on or something,
thinking about what you said about Potiphar's wife, and she was just coming at it. How did Joseph respond to her? He said, your husband's put me in charge of everything but you. How could I do such a thing and sin against
God,
God?
Right.
He understood
yeah.
the position of what was going on.
And that's what we have to understand, is that it's more than just these set of circumstances. It's just more than just that one difficult person you're trying to deal with. You know, there's more involved here. There's a spiritual battle, like you said. And the enemy is real, but our God is overpowered.
Jimbo.
And I think the danger in what you're talking about is that, I mean, a lot of people really don't realize it, but what they're doing is exactly what he wanted, and that was to be exalted above God. And when you give him that power and give him that equality to God, you're doing exactly that. You're exalting, you're lifting him up above God into a position that he does not really hold. But if you're constantly looking at saying, oh, it must be the enemy that's attacking me, or it must be him that's really determining the course of my life,
Yeah.
well, you've just put him in the position that really God is in, because God is actually the one who's determining the course of your life, you know? And so, I mean, I think that's and if you will, it may be the motivation for being that liar. You know, it's how he's, you know, no, see, there's another guy who just put me up another little notch. He just exalted, I got exalted over here, I got exalted, you know, I mean, whatever, ridiculous comparison, but still, it's how it happens. We're the ones who really exalt him. He can't do it. He has not the power.
I heard this illustration, it's like kicking a can. The can cannot move by itself. You have to give it that kick. You know?
The
I think-
can's there, yeah. Can's there.
You know,
but
the
you gotta
can
put-
is just laying there in the ditch. Unless you kick it, it doesn't move. And so, you know, we just give it too much authority, and what we have to realize is that no matter what is happening, we can say, thank you.
How
Thank
long
you.
have you lived in West Texas?
I knew somebody was gonna say the wind, but I say, you know, our God is in charge of the wind. What we're saying with this illustration is that Satan cannot move the can. Satan cannot move the can, only the Ruach, the Spirit of God. That's it.
If
He
we
can
do
move.
not learn what the wiles of the devil are,
You have to learn.
I'm dog sitting, I've got to go get
you
my
know,
dog.
he can exercise authority over us by our own will,
Yeah.
because we don't recognize it.
Well, and like
even
Paul
today,
said-
he's hiding out in the open,
Right. Paul said, we're not ignorant of his devices,
but we are.
but we are.
But we're not supposed
Not
to.
supposed to.
But in Psalms 91, it says, thou shalt tread upon the lion and the adder, the young lion and the dragon, thou shalt trample under feet. And if we don't take our positions of authority,
He'll take it over us.
absolutely.
Right, so how, just like Joseph, how do we get into that position of authority? We don't do it by saying, I'm gonna pull myself out of my bootstraps into this dungeon, and I'm gonna break out, and I'm gonna
Yeah, right,
go
no.
be where my rightful position is, because that's where Lucifer is. But we're gonna say, look, I'm gonna be in my position of authority, because I'm gonna humble myself just like the Messiah. I'm gonna suffer with him, I'm gonna be made to death in the spirit, be made
That's
alive
it.
in the flesh,
That's it.
and he will exalt me.
If he
And when
wants
I
to.
take that authority, then I'm gonna trample on the adder and the serpent and the cobra, the young lion. But we can't be doing it in the flesh. We've got to just master that flesh, be made to death in the flesh and alive in the spirit.
Because what, you can't underestimate your enemy either, because he has a whole lot more power than we do.
And he
Can't ever
knows-
forget that one.
He knows this book better than we do.
He knows the word, and the word is what causes things to happen.
And the word is how.
But I think, you know, when you said, like Joseph, I think Joseph had the authority even when he was in the pit,
Yes, I think he did.
because he learned submission through the things that he suffered, just like Yeshua, and just like us. We learn submission through the things that we suffer.
Like Yeshua, when he was on the cross. He could have called the angels. Then somebody, who was it that told him, call the angels, or he, bring the angels to help you, He did.
But he could have, yeah.
I forget where it says it, but it says that the word of the Lord kept Joseph.
The word of the Lord.
In other words, it was the word of the Lord that stayed Joseph in all of these trials.
Oh. Psalm 105. Psalm 105.
105.
In other
Talks
words,
about
the
Joseph.
word of the Lord was in his heart.
And if the Torah is written on our hearts, it'll help us stay. Is that what you're saying, Eddie?
Does it sound good to you?
It sounds good.
Sounds really good. And we have to choose to put that Torah in our hearts, to put his word in our hearts, because we can very quickly take it out and throw
And
it
not
away.
just in your heart, but you
Right.
have to speak out the word.
Out of the overflow of the heart.
The mouth speaks. I think this year, this time around, if you will, through this portion, I think prior, I kind of maybe given a little bit of short shrift to Joseph in the sense that, sold him out, that he became an Egyptian, And I think I questioned that a little bit more this year in saying that, especially pointing out that there are inferences that he uses to things like divination and stuff like that.
Right.
But I think they were the same little ruse that he used lots of times, to say, well, I could learn by divination, and yet we never see him doing it.
Right.
But it's almost like keeping up with his the little ruse that he's pulling on them, saying, no, you don't know me, I'm this great powerful guy, I'm Pharaoh's number 2.
Exactly.
Little do you know that I'm your brother, and even his servant makes reference to, don't you know that my master could use or the cup that he could use for divination, and still there's these little inferences that maybe he's doing this, and I think it's easy to sell Joseph out as just turning away from the father, but none of this would happen the way it happened
Right.
if he really had. So I think this year I'm really, I'm really,
You can't judge
Seeing
by
it differently.
appearances. He
Yeah.
appeared to be Egyptian, just like Yeshua appears to be Christian
The Pharisees in Matthew 23 appeared to be nice and
instead
pretty.
of Jewish.
Yeah, over the years, when sitting in several different Torah studies, when we come through this Torah portion, I noticed that the question of whether, how Egyptian was Joseph? Was he totally full on Hebrew? And the question of Ephraim and Manasseh, were they Egyptians or were they? That question usually is the focus of a lot of discussion and a lot of attention and a lot of conflict sometimes. And so I asked myself, why is that? And I wonder, are we trying to ask ourselves what we think about ourselves? We're here in a situation in captivity, we say. So is our heart really wanting to know? Because we're saying, okay, look, no, he's not like the world, he was the world. Or are we saying, well, no, he was in the world, but he wasn't of the world. So we're really asking ourselves this question: how much of Egypt are we going to allow to be on ourselves? For what purpose?